I buried a single sentence in a $375 million contract that would destroy the biggest deal in my company's history. And the man who stole my promotion never saw it coming. But let me start at the beginning, because revenge is always sweeter when you understand exactly what was taken from you. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and for 8 years I was the lead corporate counsel at Titan Dynamics, a mid-sized tech firm specializing in enterprise software solutions. Not the sexiest work, but it paid well and I was good at it. Really good. I'd negotiated contracts worth billions, saved the company from lawsuits that could have bankrupted us, and built a reputation as someone who read every line, every clause, every piece of fine print. That attention to detail was about to become someone's worst nightmare. The office was typical Silicon Valley adjacent, exposed brick, standing desks, kombucha on tap, and a ping-pong table no one used because we were all working 70-hour weeks. My desk sat in the corner of the legal department, surrounded by stacks of contracts and a coffee maker I'd brought from home because the office stuff tasted like battery acid. I loved that job. Loved the complexity, the negotiations, the chess game of corporate law. I'd turned down offers from bigger firms because I believed in Titan. I believed in our CEO, Marcus Webb, who'd built the company from nothing. I believed I had a future there. That belief died on a Wednesday morning in September. Marcus called me into his office at 9 a.m. Unusual, but not alarming. The CFO, Gregory Ashton, was already there, which was slightly more concerning. Gregory was new, hired 6 months earlier from a Fortune 500 company with promises of taking Titan public within 2 years. He was also my ex-boyfriend from law school. A detail that made working together awkward but manageable. We were professionals. Or so I thought. "Sarah, sit down," Marcus said. He looked uncomfortable, which was my first real warning sign. Marcus never looked uncomfortable. I sat. Gregory wouldn't meet my eyes. "We're restructuring the legal department," Marcus began. "As you know, we're in negotiations for the Olympus acquisition. It's the biggest deal we've ever attempted, and we need leadership that can handle that scale." My heart started pounding. I'd been managing the Olympus negotiations for 3 months. I knew every detail of that deal. "We're bringing in Preston Clark as Chief Legal Officer," Marcus continued. "He has experience with acquisitions this size from his time at Goldman Sachs. You'll report to him as senior counsel." The room tilted slightly. "I'm being demoted?" "It's not a demotion," Gregory said, finally speaking. His voice was smooth, practiced. "It's a reorganization. Preston needs a strong number 2, and you're perfect for that role. I've been lead counsel for 8 years. I've built this department. I'm the one who's been negotiating with Olympus for 3 months, and you've done excellent work," Marcus interrupted. "But Olympus is worth $375 million. We need someone with acquisition experience at that level." I looked at Gregory. He was studying his hands. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't about experience. This wasn't about the Olympus deal. This was Gregory ensuring I didn't have equal power to him. In corporate mergers and acquisitions, the CFO and Chief Legal Officer work closely together, 2 of the most powerful positions in any company. Gregory didn't want his ex-girlfriend as an equal. He wanted someone he controlled. Someone who owed him. Preston Clark arrived 2 weeks later. Late 50s, silver hair, expensive suits, and a handshake that lasted exactly 3 seconds, I counted. He treated me like a paralegal who'd gotten lucky. In our first meeting, he interrupted me 4 times and then asked me to take notes. I took notes. But I also started paying very close attention. Preston had been brought in specifically for the Olympus acquisition. Olympus Technologies was a European software company with massive market share and even bigger debt problems. Titan wanted their client list and intellectual property. Olympus needed Titan's cash and American market presence. On paper, it was a perfect merger. In reality, it was a nightmare of complexity. Different corporate laws, international tax implications, intellectual property transfers across jurisdictions, employee contracts in 7 countries, and regulatory approvals from both the SEC and European authorities. I'd spent 3 months untangling those complexities. I'd identified risks, built solutions, and negotiated preliminary terms with Olympus's legal team. I knew this deal better than anyone. Preston took credit for all of it. In board meetings, he'd present my work as his own. He'd reference analysis I'd done without attribution. When board members asked detailed questions, he'd look at me to answer, then nod as if he'd been about to say the same thing. Gregory backed him completely. Every time. The worst part? Preston was sloppy. He'd skim documents, miss details, make assumptions that could cost millions. But he had charisma and confidence, and in corporate America, that often matters more than competence. 2 months into his tenure, I was working late again when I found the problem. I was reviewing the due diligence reports from Olympus when I noticed something odd. Their intellectual property portfolio included patents that were listed as wholly owned, but when I cross-referenced with the European Patent Office, 3 of their most valuable patents were actually co-owned with a shell company registered in Luxembourg. This was a massive red flag. If Olympus didn't have clear ownership of these patents, the entire acquisition could be worthless. We'd be buying a company whose core value proposition was built on IP they couldn't fully control. I immediately emailed Preston with a detailed memo outlining the issue. We needed to halt negotiations until this was resolved. His response came at midnight. Good catch. I'll handle it. The next morning in the executive meeting, Preston presented the patent issue as his own discovery. He didn't mention me once. Gregory praised his thoroughness and attention to detail. I sat there, watching my work get stolen in real time, and felt something inside me break. That night, I went home and opened a bottle of wine. Then I opened my laptop and started reading the merger agreement. All 473 pages of it. Because I just realized something important. Preston was sloppy. Gregory was arrogant. And I was the only person who'd actually read every single word of this contract. Which meant I was the only person who could weaponize it. The patent issue got resolved. Olympus bought out their partner's share for 15 million euros, and the acquisition moved forward. Preston took credit for saving the deal. I took notes and smiled and said nothing, but I was learning something about myself. I'd always been the good soldier, the team player, the person who believed hard work would be rewarded. I'd been naive. In corporate America, credit goes to whoever has the best story, not who does the best work. And I'd been letting people steal my stories for too long. The merger agreement was a beast. Nearly 500 pages of dense legal language covering every aspect of the acquisition, purchase price, payment terms, warranties, representations, indemnities, closing conditions, termination rights, and enough subordinate clauses to choke a paralegal. Preston had assigned me to assist with the contract drafting, which really meant I was writing everything while he took calls and went to lunch meetings. He'd review my drafts, make minor changes to feel important, then present them as collaborative work. Fine. Let him think that. What he didn't know is that I'd started adding my own insurance policies. Nothing obviously malicious. Nothing that would get caught in a basic review. Just carefully worded clauses that gave me leverage if I ever needed it. Ambiguous language that could be interpreted multiple ways. References to subordinate agreements that didn't quite exist yet. Definitions that seemed standard but had subtle implications. I was building a legal minefield, and I was the only one who knew where the mines were buried. The key was Section 12.7, Successor Liability and Key Personnel Requirements. This section dealt with what happened if senior executives left the company post-merger. Standard stuff in acquisitions, you don't want the entire leadership team to quit the day after closing. The language required that certain key personnel remain with the merged entity for at least 18 months, or the purchase price could be adjusted downward. Here's what I added. Key personnel shall be defined as those individuals primarily responsible for due diligence, negotiation, and structural integrity of the transaction, as documented in the internal transaction records maintained by the acquiring entity. Sounds reasonable, right? Protects the deal by keeping important people around. Except primarily responsible wasn't defined. and as documented in internal transaction records, gave me a way to prove who'd actually done the work. I had emails. I had memos. I had my notes from every single meeting. I had a paper trail showing I'd been the architect of this deal while Preston took bows. If I could prove I was key personnel and then orchestrate my own departure, the deal could be renegotiated. Olympus could invoke the key personnel clause and demand a price reduction or walk away entirely. A $375 million deal could collapse because of one sentence I'd buried in a 500-page contract. But I needed to be careful. If I moved too early, they'd catch it. I needed Preston and Gregory to be so confident, so certain of their victory, that they'd never see it coming. So I played the dutiful subordinate. I worked late. I answered emails immediately. I made Preston look good in meetings. I made myself indispensable while appearing invisible. And I documented everything. Every piece of analysis I did, I saved with timestamps. Every email where Preston took credit for my work, I archived. Every meeting where I provided critical information, I took detailed notes. I built a comprehensive record proving I was the substantive legal architect of the Olympus acquisition. Then I waited for the perfect moment. It came 3 months later, in December, 2 weeks before the scheduled closing date. The board had approved the deal. Regulatory clearances were in place. Press releases were drafted. Marcus was planning a company-wide announcement. Preston was a hero. Gregory was positioning himself for a VP promotion. And I was supposedly just happy to have been part of the team. That's when I met with Marcus privately. I asked for a closed-door meeting, just the two of us. He looked surprised, but agreed. We met in the small conference room at 7 a.m., before anyone else arrived. "What's this about, Sarah?" I slid a folder across the table. "I'm resigning." His face went blank with shock. "What?" "Why? The closing is in 2 weeks exactly. Which is why I wanted to tell you personally and give you as much notice as possible." He opened the folder. Inside was my resignation letter, effective immediately, along with a detailed summary of my contributions to the Olympus deal. Every analysis, every negotiation, every problem I'd solved. All documented, timestamped, and cross-referenced. "I don't understand. You're leaving right before the biggest success of your career." "It's not my success, Marcus. It's Preston's. At least, that's what everyone believes." I kept my voice calm, professional. "I've spent 8 years here. I was the best corporate counsel you had. You demoted me for someone less qualified because your CFO wanted to sideline his ex-girlfriend. So yes, I'm leaving. Right now." Marcus's face shifted through several emotions: surprise, understanding, guilt, then calculation. "Sarah, if you leave now, it could impact the deal. Preston will need time to. Preston has had 4 months to learn this deal. If he can't manage the closing, that's a Preston problem, not a Sarah problem. I'll give you your old position back. Chief Legal Officer. Effective immediately. Just stay through the closing." I'd expected this. "No. Name your price. A raise, stock options, whatever you want, Marcus. You had months to value my work. You chose not to. Now you want me to stay because my leaving is inconvenient." I stood up. "I'll be clearing out my desk today. HR has all the paperwork." His face hardened. "You signed a non-compete. And a confidentiality agreement. If you think you can take this deal to a competitor, I'm not taking anything anywhere. I'm simply exercising my right to resign. Unless you'd like to argue that's somehow a breach of contract." He didn't have an answer for that. I walked out of his office and went straight to my desk. By noon, I'd packed everything personal, handed my badge to security, and walked out of Titan Dynamics for the last time. Preston called me 17 times that day. Gregory called 9 times. I didn't answer, because I knew what was about to happen. The Olympus legal team noticed first. 2 days after my resignation, I got a call from Elena Volkov, the lead counsel for Olympus. We developed a good working relationship during the negotiations. She was sharp, thorough, and didn't suffer fools. "Sarah, what the hell is going on?" I just got off a call with Preston Clark, and he couldn't answer basic questions about the escrow arrangements. Questions we discussed 2 months ago. I'm no longer with Titan, Elena. You'll need to direct those questions to Preston. Silence. Then, you left? 2 weeks before closing. I did. More silence. I could hear her thinking. Sarah, I need to review something with you. Off the record. Section 12.7, the Key Personnel Clause. Who drafted that language? My heart rate picked up, but I kept my voice neutral. I did. Why? Because I'm looking at it now and I'm realizing it might apply to you. If you're the primary person responsible for this transaction structure and you've just left, that could trigger a material breach condition. That's an interesting interpretation. Is it correct? I paused, choosing my words carefully. Elena, I can't give you legal advice. I'm no longer representing either party. But if you're asking whether I was the primary architect of this deal, you should look at the transaction records. Emails, memos, meeting notes. They're all timestamped and stored on Titan servers. And if those records show you were primary, what does that mean for the deal? It means you should read Section 12.7 very carefully. And maybe consult with your board about whether the key personnel requirements have been met. She hung up. I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone, and wondered if I'd just set fire to a $375 million deal. 48 hours later, Olympus's board voted to delay the closing pending a review of the key personnel clause. Preston had a meltdown. I know this because he left me a voicemail that was equal parts rage and desperation. You did this on purpose. You sabotaged this deal. If you think you're going to get away with this, delete. Gregory tried a different approach. He showed up at my apartment at 8 p.m. on a Thursday. I answered the door in sweatpants and a law school t-shirt. You need to fix this, he said without preamble. I don't need to do anything. I don't work there anymore. Elena is claiming your key personnel. She's demanding a reduction in the purchase price or she's walking. Sounds like a Preston problem. His jaw tightened. You know what you're doing. You buried that clause deliberately. This is about revenge because you didn't get the title you wanted. No, Gregory. This is about consequences. You brought in someone unqualified to do a job I was already doing, and now you're discovering that actions have repercussions. If this deal collapses, Titan could be in serious financial trouble. We've leveraged everything for this acquisition. People could lose their jobs, then maybe you should have thought about that before you prioritized your ego over competence. He stared at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before: fear. Real fear. What do you want? More money? The CLO position? Tell me what it takes to make this go away. I smiled. I don't want anything from Titan. I want you to live with what you've done. I closed the door. The next day, Marcus called. His voice was different, defeated. Olympus is demanding a $75 million reduction in the purchase price. They're claiming breach of the key personnel clause. Our lawyers say they have a case. That's unfortunate. Sarah, please. You built this deal. You know it inside and out. If you'd just come back for the closing, I gave you multiple opportunities to value my work, Marcus. You chose not to. Now you're asking me to save you from your own decisions. This isn't just about me. This is about everyone at Titan. Good people who'll be hurt if this deal falls apart. That one stung. Because he was right. There were people at Titan I cared about. People who'd done nothing wrong. But I'd learned something over the past few months. Sometimes collateral damage is the price of justice. Sometimes you can't win without others losing. I'm sorry, Marcus. But I can't help you. I hung up before he could respond. The Olympus board gave Titan 1 week to resolve the key personnel issue, or they'd walk away from the deal entirely. The problem was, there was no easy resolution. I was gone. The work was done by me, and the contract said what it said. Preston tried to argue that he'd supervised my work, that he was the real key personnel. But Elena had done her homework. She'd requested all internal documents related to the deal, and Titan had to comply under the merger agreement's disclosure provisions. Those documents showed emails, memos, and meeting notes with my name on everything critical. Preston's contributions were surface level at best. The record was devastating. Gregory tried to argue the clause was ambiguous and unenforceable. But I drafted it carefully. It was clear enough to be valid, ambiguous enough to require interpretation, and the facts supported Olympus's reading. The board of directors held an emergency meeting. I know this because I received a subpoena to appear as a witness. They wanted to ask me, under oath, about my role in the deal and my interpretation of Section 12.7. I hired a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, I hired Julia Chin, the attorney who'd taught me contract drafting in law school. She was expensive, brilliant, and had a reputation for eviscerating opposing counsel. "This is extraordinary," Julia said, reading through the contract. "You buried a nuclear bomb in this agreement." I protected myself. "You did more than that. You created a self-executing revenge mechanism. If they mistreated you and you left, the deal could collapse. That's either genius or absolutely reckless. Maybe both." She smiled. "I like you. Let's make them regret everything." The deposition took place in a glass-walled conference room at a law firm in downtown Manhattan. Present were attorneys for Titan, attorneys for Olympus, a court reporter, and me. Preston was there. So was Gregory. So was Marcus. They all looked terrible. Preston had bags under his eyes. Gregory's expensive suit looked slept in. Marcus seemed to have aged 10 years. Olympus's lead attorney was a man named Viktor Petrov, Romanian by birth, educated at Oxford, and renowned for being absolutely merciless in negotiations. Elena had clearly brought in reinforcements. He started simply, "MS. Mitchell, please state your former role at Titan Dynamics." "Senior Corporate Counsel, formerly lead Corporate Counsel." "And what was your involvement in the Olympus Technologies acquisition?" For the next 4 hours, I walked them through everything. Every analysis, every negotiation, every problem I'd solved. I had documentation for all of it, emails with timestamps, memos with my signature, meeting notes in my handwriting. Victor asked about Section 12.7. "Who drafted this language?" "I did." "And what did you intend this clause to accomplish?" I looked directly at Preston. "I intended to ensure that the people who actually did the work on this deal were properly valued and retained. It's standard in acquisitions to protect against key personnel departures." "Did you consider yourself key personnel?" "I considered myself the lead attorney on this transaction, yes." "And did you communicate that to Mr. Clark or Mr. Ashton?" "Through my work product, constantly. Whether they chose to acknowledge it is another matter." Preston's attorney jumped in. "Objection. That's not responsive to the question." Victor waved him off. "I'll allow it. MS. Mitchell, did you resign in order to trigger this clause?" This was the critical question. If I said yes, I could be liable for tortious interference or breach of fiduciary duty. If I said no, I'd have to explain the timing. Julia had coached me on this. Tell the truth, but frame it properly. "I resigned because I was demoted for reasons that had nothing to do with my performance," I said carefully. "I was replaced by someone less qualified who took credit for my work. The timing of my resignation was my choice, but the reasons for it were created by Titan's management." "Did you intend for your resignation to damage the Olympus deal?" "I intended to stop working for people who didn't value me. Any consequences of that decision are the result of how they structured the organization, not my intent." Technically true. Morally questionable. Legally defensible. The deposition ended at 6 p.m. I was exhausted. Julia walked me out. "That was perfect," she said. "You gave them nothing they can use. And you made Preston look like an incompetent credit thief. What happens now?" "Now we wait. Olympus has all the ammunition they need to renegotiate. The question is whether Titan can survive the haircut." 3 days later, Titan and Olympus reached a settlement. The purchase price was reduced by $65 million. Titan had to agree to specific performance guarantees. And they had to make a public statement acknowledging transition challenges that had impacted the deal. The stock market reacted immediately. Titan's share price dropped 18% in one day. The board demanded accountability. Marcus held a press conference. He looked broken. "We've successfully closed the Olympus acquisition, though at terms different from what we'd initially negotiated. We're conducting an internal review of our leadership structure and decision-making processes." Translation: Heads were going to roll. Preston was fired within a week. Gregory resigned to pursue other opportunities, which meant he was forced out before he could be terminated. The board brought in a new management team. And then I got a call from the new CEO. Her name was Catherine Park, and she'd been on Titan's board for 3 years. She was known as someone who didn't tolerate nonsense and who actually understood what she was looking at in financial statements and legal documents. Ms. Mitchell, I'd like to meet with you. I don't work at Titan anymore. I know. That's why I want to meet. We had coffee at a place in Brooklyn, far from Titan's offices. Catherine was direct. What you did was either brilliant or destructive, and I haven't decided which yet. But I've read everything. I know what Preston did. I know what Gregory did. I know Marcus enabled it all. Then you know I didn't destroy that deal. They did, through their incompetence and ego. That's one interpretation. Another is that you weaponized a contract to get revenge. Maybe both are true. She smiled slightly. I like honest people. Titan needs to rebuild its legal department. We need a chief legal officer who actually knows what they're doing. Someone who won't let us make stupid mistakes. My heart jumped, but I kept my face neutral. You're offering me the job? I'm offering you a conversation about the job. I need to know, if we hire you back, are we hiring someone committed to the company's success or someone planning the next revenge plot? I thought about this carefully. What happened wasn't revenge. It was consequences. You can call me back, but you need to understand something. I won't be invisible anymore. I won't let people take credit for my work. I won't be the silent second who makes everyone else look good. If that's what you want, hire someone else. Catherine looked at me for a long moment. Good. That's exactly what I want. Someone who'll tell me the truth and won't let executives coast on other people's work. She slid a folder across the table. Inside was an offer letter. Chief Legal Officer. 20% salary increase. Equity. Board observer rights. Think about it, she said. I did think about it. For about 3 seconds. I accept. I returned to Titan Dynamics 3 months after I'd left, but as a completely different person in a completely different company. Catherine had cleaned house. The new executive team actually listened when I spoke. They read the documents I prepared. They credited my work appropriately. It was surreal, honestly, like discovering what a functional workplace actually looked like. The Olympus integration was rocky, but we managed it. The reduced purchase price actually turned out to be a blessing. We weren't as over-leveraged, and we had cash reserves for unexpected problems. Within 18 months, the merged company was profitable and growing. Preston Clark? Last I heard, he was doing contract work for small firms, his reputation permanently damaged by what had come out during the depositions. Turns out, when you spend your career taking credit for other people's work, eventually everyone figures it out. Gregory left the finance industry entirely. I heard through the grapevine that he's teaching business school now. I hope he teaches his students better than he practiced. Marcus stayed on as CEO for 6 months, then retired with a generous package. He sent me a note when he left. You were right about everything. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I kept the note. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. As for that clause, section 12.7, it's become something of a legend in corporate law circles. I've had attorneys from other firms ask me about it, dissecting how I constructed it, marveling at its elegance. Some call it brilliant. Others call it vindictive. I call it insurance. Because here's what I learned. In corporate America, you need to protect yourself. Not because everyone is malicious, but because even good people make bad decisions when egos and ambition get involved. You need leverage. You need documentation. You need to be your own advocate because no one else will be. But here's the other thing I learned. Revenge and justice aren't the same thing, even when they look identical. When I buried that clause in the contract, I told myself it was protective. But if I'm honest, I was also angry. I wanted them to hurt the way they'd hurt me. I wanted them to feel what it was like to have something important taken away. Did I get revenge? Absolutely. Preston lost his job. Gregory lost his career trajectory. Marcus lost his reputation. The company lost $65 million. But did I get justice? That's harder to answer. Justice would have been them recognizing my value before I had to force them to see it. Justice would have been a workplace where competence mattered more than gender, or who you knew, or who you dated. What I got instead was restitution. I got my position back, but only after burning everything down and proving I was the only one who could rebuild it. Sometimes I wonder if it was worth it. If the cost, the stress, the legal fees, the damaged relationships, the $65 million was justified by the outcome. Then I remember sitting in that meeting where Preston presented my work as his own, and I think, yes, it was absolutely worth it. Because the alternative was accepting being invisible. Accepting that hard work and competence don't matter as much as charisma and connections. Accepting that you should just be grateful for whatever scraps you're given. I refused to accept that. And that refusal changed everything. These days, I mentor young attorneys, especially women. I teach them contract drafting, negotiation, strategy. But I also teach them something more important: document everything, trust but verify, and never assume competence will be recognized without proof. And I teach them about insurance clauses. Little sentences buried in long contracts that protect you when everything else fails. Because sometimes, the best revenge is simply making sure that when someone tries to erase you, they realize too late that you were the foundation holding everything up. The Olympus deal taught me that power isn't just about titles or salaries. It's about being essential. It's about making sure that if they get rid of you, they lose something they can't afford to lose. Section 12.7 was my insurance policy. I hope I never have to write another one. But if I do, I'll know exactly how. People ask me sometimes if I regret what I did. If I feel bad about the money Titan lost, the jobs that were affected, the chaos that ensued. Here's my answer. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that we live in a world where talented people have to build legal tripwires to protect themselves from being exploited. I regret that doing good work isn't enough, that you also have to be strategic and ruthless and willing to blow everything up if you're not treated with basic respect. But do I regret my specific actions? No, because sometimes the only way to change a broken system is to break it completely and force everyone to rebuild it properly. And sometimes, justice isn't patient at all. Sometimes it's just one carefully worded sentence, waiting in the fine print for the perfect moment to detonate. So here's what I want you to take from my story. Read the contract. All of it. Every clause, every definition, every subordinate agreement. Because the person who controls the language controls the outcome. And never, ever underestimate someone just because they're quiet, diligent, and focused on the work. We're not invisible. We're just waiting for you to realize how much you need us. By then, it's usually too late.